Welcome, dear friends, to a comprehensive journey through 160 facts about Eevee the evolution Pokémon, whose genetic instability allows it to adapt into more forms than any other Pokémon, whose fluffy appearance conceals remarkable biological flexibility that scientists have studied for generations without fully understanding mechanisms that enable transformations into 8 known evolutions, with possibilities that more undiscovered forms await in environments where Eevee hasn't yet been exposed to evolutionary pressures that trigger metamorphosis into specialized types, representing nearly half the type chart, creating unprecedented evolutionary radiation from single species. Tonight, we'll explore everything about Eevee and its evolutions across 4 parts, totaling 160 facts, told gently, like bedtime stories about the most adaptable Pokémon, whose evolutionary potential reflects themes about possibility, choice, and transformation that resonate beyond biology into metaphors about personal development and about paths not taken, when choosing one evolution means foreclosing others, creating permanent decisions that shape identity through selections that cannot be reversed, making Eevee's evolution into meditation on commitment and consequence. If you enjoy this Eevee exploration, please subscribe and share in the comments which evolution is your favorite, whether its original trio of Vaporeon, Jolteon, and Flareon, whether it's Espeon and Umbreon from Friendship evolutions, whether it's Leafeon and Glaceon from location-based transformations, or whether it's Sylveon representing Fairy type's introduction through affection that bonds create. So, settle into comfort, close your eyes whenever sleep beckons, and let us begin this gentle journey through Eevee facts, told soothingly like tales about the Pokémon whose potential exceeds any other species through possessing genetic plasticity that allows becoming nearly anything depending on circumstances that shape development. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from tonight. So, let's begin. Fact 1. Eevee's Japanese name is Eevee, which likely derives from evolution, combined with phonetic elements, creating name that emphasizes species-defining characteristic of exceptional evolutionary potential that scientific community recognized when classifying Pokémon whose genetic structure revealed unprecedented instability that normally would be pathological, but which Eevee's biology somehow manages productively through channeling mutation that would destroy normal organisms into controlled transformations that create stable, evolved forms rather than creating cancerous growths or developmental failures that genetic instability typically produces in species lacking Eevee's remarkable biological safeguards. Fact 2. Eevee is classified as the evolution Pokémon in Pokédex entries across all generations, making its capacity for transformation into official taxonomic designation rather than being incidental characteristic that happens to define species, creating situation where scientific classification acknowledges that Eevee's essence is adaptability, making evolution not just something Eevee does, but something Eevee fundamentally is, when identity itself consists of potential for becoming other things, creating philosophical puzzle about whether Eevee has essence beyond a capacity for transformation or whether transformative potential is essence, making Eevee's nature consist entirely of possibility without fixed characteristics that evolution wouldn't alter. Fact 3. Eevee's genetic code is described as irregular and unstable in Pokédex entries, containing mutations that allow it to adapt to environmental changes through evolution rather than through gradual adaptation that normal species experience across generations. The genetic instability makes each Eevee slightly different from others, with no two specimens having identical DNA, creating situation where Eevee as species is genetically heterogeneous to degree that exceeds normal genetic variation, making Eevee population into collection of related but distinct individuals whose genetic differences are so substantial that they barely qualify as single species except through sharing capacity for evolving into same set of possible forms. Fact 4. The number of Eevee evolutions currently 8, with Vaporeon, Jolteon, Flareon, Espeon, Umbreon, Leafeon, Glaceon, and Sylveon exceeds any other Pokemon's evolutionary branches, making Eevee holder of record for most diverse evolutionary outcomes from single base species. The 8 evolutions represent 9 different types when including Eevee's normal type, making Eevee family span half the type chart, demonstrating remarkable versatility that no other evolutionary line approaches through having, at most, 3 or 4 stages or branches, while Eevee family contains 9 distinct forms that all trace ancestry to common base form that contains genetic potential for manifesting as any of 8 specialized types. Fact 5. Eevee evolves through more different methods than any other Pokemon, requiring evolutionary stones for original trio, requiring friendship plus time of day for Espeon and Umbreon, requiring location-based leveling for Leafeon and Glaceon, and requiring affection plus knowing fairy move for Sylveon. The diversity of evolution methods reflects diversity of forms, with each evolution requiring different trigger, suggesting that different evolutions respond to different environmental cues or different relationship qualities, making evolution method into narrative element, where how Eevee evolves tells story about what circumstances or what bonds shape transformation into particular specialized form. Fact 6. Eevee was designed early in Generation I development as Pokemon whose evolutionary flexibility would demonstrate evolution mechanics potential through showing that single species could branch into multiple outcomes rather than following linear progression that most evolutionary lines demonstrate. The design philosophy made Eevee into showcase for evolution systems possibilities, creating species whose purpose was demonstrating mechanics as much as being creature with ecological role, making Eevee somewhat metatextual. Pokemon that exists partly to demonstrate game systems rather than existing purely for world-building reasons that most Pokemon serve. Fact 7. The original plan was for Eevee to evolve into all types eventually, but limitations prevented implementing more than 3 evolutions in Generation 1, leaving original trio as placeholder for more complete type coverage that later generations would provide through adding 5 more evolutions across subsequent releases. The incremental expansion meant that Eevee family grew gradually, with Generation 2 adding 2, Generation 4 adding 2, and Generation VI adding 1, creating pattern where new generations sometimes introduced new evolutions as showcase for generations' new features, whether those features were friendship mechanics, location-based evolution, or fairy-type introduction. Fact 8. Eevee's base stats are perfectly balanced at 55 across HP, attack, defense, special attack, special defense, and speed, creating unusual symmetry, where no stat is stronger or weaker than others, making Eevee versatile but not specialized before evolution occurs. The balanced distribution reflects Eevee's undifferentiated potential, where it hasn't yet committed to particular role that evolution would optimize for making base form into blank slate, whose stats will redistribute dramatically upon evolution. When 525 base stat total, that evolution's share gets allocated differently depending on which evolution occurs, determining whether Eevee becomes physical attacker, special attacker, tank, or balanced combatant. Fact 9. Eevee's irregular genetic structure allows it to rapidly adapt to environment through evolution that occurs within individuals' lifetime rather than requiring generational change that normal evolution requires, making Eevee's transformation immediate response to environmental pressures rather than being gradual population-level change across millennia. This within-lifetime adaptation resembles metamorphosis that insects undergo more than it resembles evolution that Darwin described, making Eevee's evolution actually metamorphosis, where individual transforms rather than where species transforms through offspring being different from parents who reproduce them. Fact 10. The DNA instability that allows evolution also makes Eevee vulnerable to environmental factors that stable DNA would resist, meaning that Eevee's adaptive strength is simultaneously weakness when environmental influences can trigger unwanted transformations, or when genetic instability causes health problems that stable genetic code would prevent. The trade-off between adaptability and stability reflects broader biological principle, where specialists excel in narrow conditions, while generalists survive in varied conditions, making Eevee's strategy of remaining adaptable into risk when environments are stable, and benefit of stability outweighs benefit of flexibility that unstable conditions favor. Fact 11. Eevee's fluffy fur collar serves thermoregulatory function according to some interpretations, helping Eevee survive in varied climates through insulation that maintains body temperature across temperature ranges that less adaptable Pokémon couldn't tolerate. The fur's fluffiness also serves social function, making Eevee appear cute and non-threatening, encouraging humans and Pokémon to approach rather than to fear, making Eevee's appearance into adaptive advantage through inspiring, protective instincts that lead to adoption by trainers who provide resources and protection that wild survival would require Eevee to obtain independently. Fact 12. Eevee can sense when environmental conditions favor particular evolution through mechanisms that researchers haven't fully understood, but which involve detecting stimuli indicating that particular type would thrive in current environment. The ability to sense appropriate evolution timing suggests that Eevee possesses environmental awareness exceeding most Pokemon's capacity for assessing ecological conditions, making Eevee into sophisticated analyst of habitat, characteristics whose evolution decisions reflect accurate assessment of which specialization current environment rewards through providing resources or reducing threats that particular types can exploit or resist better than other types could manage. Fact 13. The size of Eevee's genetic code is substantially larger than typical Pokemon's genome, according to scientific studies within Pokemon World, containing more base pairs than necessary for basic biological functions, suggesting that extra genetic material consists of dormant, evolution-enabling sequences that activate when appropriate triggers occur. The large genome makes sense because containing genetic instructions for 8 different possible body plans requires more information than containing instructions for single fixed body plan would require making Eevee genetically complex. Despite being morphologically simple before evolution determines which genetic sequences activate and which remain dormant. Fact 14. Eevee eggs take longer to hatch than most normal-type eggs, reflecting genetic complexity that development must navigate when embryo contains potential for becoming multiple different forms, requiring developmental processes that can branch into different pathways depending on signals that Eevee receives even during incubation. The extended development time allows genetic regulatory networks to establish flexibility that rapid development wouldn't permit, creating embryonic period where developmental fate remains uncommitted, allowing external factors to influence which genetic programs will become active and which will remain suppressed after hatching occurs. Fact 15. Wild Eevee populations are rare compared to other normal types, possibly because genetic instability makes reproduction less reliable than stable species experience when genetic mutations that enable evolution also disrupt normal reproductive processes that stable DNA facilitates. The rarity makes Eevee valuable to trainers and researchers who prize its evolutionary potential, creating demand that wild populations cannot sustainably supply, requiring captive breeding programs that maintain Eevee availability for R&R, training, and research purposes that wild populations alone couldn't support without population collapse from overcollection. Fact 16. Eevee's adaptability extends beyond just evolution to include learning moves from multiple types through TMs and breeding, creating move pool versatility that few unevolved Pokémon match. The diverse move pool reflects genetic flexibility that allows incorporating techniques that would normally be type-locked, suggesting that Eevee's genetic instability makes it capable of expressing genes that normal types suppress through having more rigid developmental programs that Eevee's fluid genetics circumvent, allowing moves that shouldn't be possible for normal type to learn through genetic plasticity, extending to protein expression, enabling attack types that require biochemistry that normal types lack. Fact 17. The decision to evolve Eevee or keep it as Eevee creates strategic tension in games because unevolved Eevee with Eviolite item can achieve defensive stats comparable to some evolutions while maintaining move pool versatility that evolution would eliminate through committing to particular type. The viability of unevolved Eevee demonstrates that evolution isn't always improvement, and that sometimes maintaining potential is more valuable than actualizing particular specialization, making Eevee rare case, where refusing evolution might be optimal strategy rather than being suboptimal choice that sentimentality might motivate, but which competitive play wouldn't justify. Fact 18. Eevee is one of few Pokémon featured as starter choice in some games, including Pokémon Yellow, where players receive Eevee as starter, mimicking anime rival Blue's Eevee, creating parallel between player and rival, whose paths diverge, despite similar starting points. The starter status elevates Eevee from ordinary Pokémon into special significance, creating bonding opportunity with species whose evolutionary potential becomes personal choice that player makes about which direction to develop starter, whose evolution reflects player preferences about battle style and type coverage that team composition requires. Fact 19. The shiny coloration of Eevee is subtle white divided by cream tint rather than dramatic color change that many shinies feature, creating understated variant that collectors prize, despite lacking obvious distinctiveness that casual observers might not notice without careful comparison. The subtle, shiny coloration persists through evolutions, with shiny evolutions having distinctive but not garish colorations that maintain aesthetic coherence, rather than being random color swaps that some shiny forms employ without regard for whether alternative palette makes visual sense for species whose design certain colors were chosen to represent. Fact 20. Eevee's cry is considered one of cuter Pokémon vocalizations resembling small mammal squeaks that inspire protective responses in humans and other Pokémon, making Eevee's audio design into adaptive advantage, similar to how visual design inspires care. The cute cry, combined with cute appearance, creates multimedia cuteness that makes Eevee overwhelmingly adorable through visual and auditory channels, working together to trigger nurturing instincts that lead to adoption by trainers who want to care for creature whose design successfully exploits human preferences for neotenic features that baby animals possess. Fact 21. Eevee's footprint design in games shows four-toed paws consistent with canine or feline anatomy, suggesting that Eevee is mammalian, despite being Pokémon whose biology might not perfectly map onto earthly taxonomic categories. The mammalian characteristics, including fur, live birth implied by egg mechanics, representing shortened pregnancy, and apparent warm-blooded nature, make Eevee recognizable as mammal-like. Even though Pokémon biology doesn't necessarily follow same rules that earthly mammals obey, making Eevee simultaneously familiar as mammal analog, and alien as creature whose genetics and evolution work differently than any earthly organism's genetics work. Fact 22. The gender ratio of Eevee is 87.5% male and 12.5% female, making female Eevee rare and making breeding for specific evolution more difficult when female parent determines species that offspring belongs to in most breeding combinations. The male-biased gender ratio might reflect biological reality, where genetic instability that makes evolution possible also disrupts sex determination, creating skewed ratios as side effect of mutations that enable adaptation, but which also affect developmental pathways. That sex determination depends on making gender imbalance into cost that Eevee pays for evolutionary flexibility that defines species. Fact 23. Eevee can learn Last Resort as signature move exclusive to Eevee and evolutions, creating thematic connection where Last Resort technique represents desperate measure that evolutionary flexibility enables through having backup options that specialists lack. The move's requirement that all other moves be used first creates narrative where Last Resort represents having exhausted normal options, making desperate technique necessary, reflecting Eevee's philosophy of adaptability, where having multiple options means always having answer to challenges that would defeat less flexible species who lack alternatives when primary strategies fail. Fact 24. Partner Eevee in Let's Go Eevee has special moves unavailable to normal Eevee, including Bouncy Bubble, Buzzy Buzz, Sizzly Slide, and others representing different types, creating situation where refusing evolution grants access to multi-type move pool that evolution would replace with specialized but limited options. The partner Eevee demonstrates alternate evolutionary philosophy, where remaining unevolved maintains versatility that evolution sacrifices for specialization, making choice between evolving for type advantage versus remaining unevolved for image type coverage into legitimate strategic decision rather than evolution being obviously superior, option that refusing would be sentimental mistake. Fact 25. Eevee was first Pokémon besides Starter Trio to receive Gigantamax form in Sword and Shield DLC, creating G-Max form with extremely fluffy appearance and signature move G-Max Cuddle that infatuates opponents. The Gigantamax form emphasizes cuteness to extreme, creating design where fluffiness becomes comical through exaggeration, making Gigantamax Eevee simultaneously adorable and absurd through taking defining characteristic to logical extreme, where cuteness overwhelms opponents through infatuation that prevents them from attacking creature that design made irresistibly charming. Fact 26. The concept of evolution entered Pokémon vocabulary as terms specifically describing Eevee's evolutions, distinguishing them from normal evolutions that other Pokémon undergo, creating linguistic recognition that Eevee's transformations are categorically different from typical evolution that most species experience. The terminology demonstrates how Eevee family is special case requiring special language because existing vocabulary of evolution doesn't adequately capture what makes Eevee's branching transformations distinctive, compared to linear progressions that most evolutionary lines follow without offering choices that evolutions present to trainers deciding which specialization serves team needs best. Fact 27. Eevee's Pokédex number is 133 inches. National Pokédex creating sequence where Eevee at 133 is followed by Vaporeon at 134, Jolteon at 135, and Flareon at 136, grouping original evolutionary family together numerically before later evolutions received numbers based on generation when they were introduced. The numerical grouping reflects how original Trio was designed as unit with Eevee creating cohesive family block in Pokédex, while later additions were integrated into existing numerical sequence rather than being inserted to maintain family grouping, demonstrating how Eevee family expanded beyond original concept that Generation I established. Fact 28. Eevee appears in multiple regions across games, suggesting that species has wide natural range despite rarity within any particular region, creating distribution where Eevee is found globally but sparsely, making it cosmopolitan species whose evolutionary adaptability allows surviving in varied climates and ecosystems that specialist species couldn't tolerate. The wide range demonstrates successful strategy, where being able to evolve into forms suited for local conditions allows colonizing diverse environments that would exclude less adaptable species, requiring specific conditions that only narrow ranges provide, making Eevee's flexibility into competitive advantage in colonization. Fact 29. The design of Eevee draws inspiration from various small mammals, including foxes, cats, and dogs, creating chimeric appearance that combines features from multiple animals rather than being obvious reference to single species. The blended design makes Eevee recognizable as mammal without being identifiable as specific mammal type, creating ambiguity that reflects genetic ambiguity, where Eevee isn't committed to particular form until evolution occurs, making appearance that suggests multiple possibilities appropriate for creature whose nature is undifferentiated potential awaiting specialization. Fact 30. Eevee's popularity among fans consistently ranks it among top Pokémon in official polls, demonstrating enduring appeal that transcends generations of players who discovered Eevee during different eras, but who all recognized appealing design and compelling mechanics that evolutionary options provide. The lasting popularity makes Eevee into franchise icon whose recognition rivals starter Pokémon, and Pikachu, creating small group of Pokémon whose fame extends beyond dedicated fans into broader cultural consciousness, where even non-players recognize designs that successful marketing and appealing aesthetics made famous. Fact 31. The Z-move exclusive to Eevee, called Extreme Evo Boost, requires Eevee to know Last Resort and to hold Eevee Z, creating ultimate move that sharply raises all stats, representing evolutionary potential, manifesting as power boost that temporarily grants benefits that permanent evolution would provide. The Z move demonstrates how refusing evolution doesn't mean refusing power, when temporary transformation through Z move provides strength without permanence that evolution would impose, making Eevee Z into compromise between evolution and remaining unevolved through accessing power while maintaining base form that holds potential for eventually evolving differently if circumstances change. Fact 32. Eevee plushies are among best-selling Pokémon merchandise, demonstrating that cute design translates into commercial success beyond just games and anime, creating multimedia franchise where Eevee appears on countless products from clothing to accessories to home goods. The merchandising success reflects design excellence, where visual appeal that made Eevee popular in games also makes it commercially viable as character whose image sells products to fans who want to surround themselves with representations of favorite Pokémon whose cuteness transcends medium, making Eevee valuable intellectual property that generates revenue across diverse product categories. Fact 33. The Mystery Dungeon series treats Eevee as potential player character in multiple games, reflecting popularity and reflecting versatility, when Eevee's multiple evolution options create narrative branching that accommodates different player choices throughout story. The player Eevee demonstrates how evolutionary mechanics translate into story mechanics, where choice about evolution becomes plot point rather than being purely mechanical. Decision-making evolution, emotionally significant through tying transformation to narrative moments that give gameplay choices storytelling weight that pure stat optimization wouldn't provide without narrative context. Fact 34. Eevee's relationship with environmental factors that trigger evolution creates biological sensitivity, where normal Pokémon might ignore environmental stimuli, but where Eevee's DNA responds to radiation, electromagnetic fields, temperature, relationships, and other factors that evolution requires. The environmental responsiveness makes Eevee into living sensor whose body detects conditions that other Pokémon wouldn't notice, creating creature whose evolution serves as indicator of environmental characteristics that Eevee's transformation reveals through becoming form that current conditions favor, creating living barometer whose metamorphosis communicates information about habitat that careful observation of evolution outcomes reveals. Fact 35. The Let's Go games made Eevee into version mascot alongside Pikachu, elevating it to legendary starter status that few Pokémon achieve through being featured on game packaging and being given special treatment, including exclusive moves and costumes. The mascot status validated Eevee's popularity through commercial recognition that it deserved equal billing with franchise icon Pikachu, creating paired versions where players chose between Electric Mouse and Evolution Fox as starter, whose special treatment made them substantially stronger than other Pokémon, creating power fantasy where starter excelled beyond what normal specimens of same species could achieve. Fact 36. Eevee's name in various languages maintains phonetic similarity to English name, creating international consistency that preserves brand identity across markets, unlike some Pokémon whose names change substantially between languages. The international name consistency demonstrates that Eevee was always intended as global icon, whose recognition depended on maintaining naming coherence that translation might disrupt if each market created completely different name, eliminating phonetic connections that help players recognize same Pokémon across language barriers that different names would create. Fact 37. The genetic research into Eevee, conducted by scientists within Pokémon World, has yielded insights about evolution mechanics that studying other Pokémon wouldn't provide, because Eevee's dramatic within lifetime transformation makes it ideal model organism for studying how environmental factors influence development. The research applications make Eevee scientifically valuable beyond just being cute, creating dual value, where trainers prize Eevee for battling and for companionship, while researchers prize Eevee for insights that studying its unique genetics provides about biological principles that all Pokémon might follow, but which Eevee demonstrates more clearly than species whose evolution is simpler. Fact 38. Eevee's ability. Adaptability increases stab bonus from 1.5 times to 2 times, making normal type moves from Eevee hit harder than normal type moves from most other normal types, demonstrating that even without evolution, Eevee possesses advantages that compensate for lack of specialization. The ability reflects genetic flexibility, where ability to adapt extends beyond just evolution into combat, where attacks that match user's type receive extra boost, representing how Eevee's adaptive nature makes it excel at whatever form it currently possesses, creating synergy between ability and species concept, where being evolution Pokémon means being good at being whatever type you currently are. Fact 39. The hidden ability anticipation allows Eevee to sense when opponents have super effective moves, creating pre-battle intelligence that other Pokémon lack through sensitivity that genetic instability provides. As side benefit, the ability to detect threats before they manifest represents how evolutionary flexibility requires environmental awareness, making Eevee perceptive about dangers that stable species might not notice until too late, creating advantage where sensitivity compensates for vulnerability when knowing what threatens you allows avoiding threats that ignorance would make unavoidable through surprising, unprepared victims who didn't anticipate what Eevee's anticipation reveals. Fact 40. Eevee represents possibility and potential in Pokémon mythology, making it symbol for player agency, where choosing which evolution to pursue becomes metaphor for life choices, where committing to one path means foreclosing others, creating permanent consequences that cannot be undone once evolution occurs. The symbolism makes Eevee philosophically rich beyond just being cute. Pokémon, through representing themes about identity, about choice, about specialization versus versatility, and about how development involves losing possibilities as we commit to particular identities that exclude alternatives, making Eevee into meditation on becoming through choosing what will be from among multiple options that potential contains before choices determine actuality. And so concludes the first part of our Eevee exploration, having discovered Eevee's genetic instability that enables unprecedented evolutionary flexibility, its balanced stats reflecting undifferentiated potential, its diverse evolution methods representing different environmental and relational triggers, its design combining features from multiple mammals creating ambiguous appearance, its popularity translating into merchandise and mascot status, and its symbolic significance representing choice and possibility that resonate beyond mechanics. Rest now if sleep calls, or continue to part 2 where we'll explore each evolution individually, discovering what makes each transformation unique and what each evolution reveals about Eevee's remarkable adaptability. Sleep gently, dear friends. Welcome back, dear friends, to our continuing journey through Eevee facts. In this second part, we'll explore the original trio of evolutions, Vaporeon, Jolteon, and Flareon, whose stone-based evolutions established the pattern that later generations would expand upon. Discover the friendship-based evolutions, Espeon and Umbreon, that Generation 2 introduced, creating day-night mechanics. Examine the biological adaptations that each evolution developed for thriving in specialized niches. Investigate the lore and Pokédex entries, revealing disturbing or fascinating details about each form, and uncover the competitive histories where certain evolutions dominated while others struggled to find viability. So settle back comfortably, close your eyes when sleep beckons, and let us continue this gentle exploration of how Eevee becomes water, electricity, fire, psychic power, and darkness. Fact 41. Vaporeon is the bubble jet Pokémon, evolving from Eevee through waterstone exposure, creating first evolution that most players encounter when receiving Waterstone from Cerulean City Gym or when purchasing one from Celadon Department Store. The water-type evolution transforms Eevee's genetic structure to adapt for aquatic environments through developing fins, streamlined body, and biological systems, allowing underwater respiration, creating dramatic metamorphosis where terrestrial mammal becomes aquatic creature within moments that evolution requires for restructuring entire physiology into form suited for oceanic life that base Eevee couldn't survive without drowning. Fact 42. Vaporeon's cells are described in Pokédex as being similar to water molecules, allowing it to melt invisibly into water and become undetectable when submerged, creating camouflage that perfect mimicry enables through being composed of same substance as surrounding environment. The cellular water composition creates biological impossibility, where living tissue becomes liquid without losing organization that life requires, suggesting that Vaporeon exists in quantum state between solid organism and liquid water, shifting between states depending on circumstances that favor visibility or favor invisibility that melting into water provides when predators or prey approach. Fact 43. The ability to detect moisture in air allows Vaporeon to predict rain according to Pokédex entries, creating weather sensitivity that Tailfin supposedly displays through beginning to vibrate when humidity increases, indicating approaching precipitation. The meteorological sensitivity makes Vaporeon into living barometer, whose behavior forecasts weather changes that human instruments might not detect until later, when conditions more obviously indicate coming storms that Vaporeon sensed early through biological sensors that evolution developed for thriving in aquatic environments where weather patterns determine habitat quality through rainfall, affecting water levels and water temperature. Fact 44. Vaporeon possesses highest HP stat among all evolutions with 130 base HP, creating exceptional durability that makes it excellent tank, capable of absorbing attacks that would KO frailer evolutions. The high HP, combined with decent 110 special attack and 95 special defense, makes Vaporeon into bulky water type that excels at wearing down opponents through longevity rather than through overwhelming offense, creating strategic niche where Vaporeon survives long enough to gradually accumulate damage on opponents who cannot quickly eliminate durable fish dog, whose HP pool requires multiple attacks for depleting. Fact 45. The design of Vaporeon combines aquatic and terrestrial features, including mermaid-like tail, fish-like fins, but also mammalian head and ears, creating chimeric appearance that reflects transition between land and water lifestyles. The hybrid design demonstrates how evolution adapted terrestrial Eevee for aquatic existence without completely eliminating mammalian characteristics, creating intermediate form that functions in water but that retains traces of terrestrial ancestry, making Vaporeon recognizable as Eevee evolution rather than being completely alien fish creature whose connection to base form wouldn't be obvious without knowing evolutionary relationship. Fact 46. Vaporeon's hidden ability. Hydration cures status conditions during rain, creating synergy with rain teams, where Vaporeon becomes nearly unkillable through healing status, while possessing high HP that makes it naturally durable, even on the scores, before factoring immunity to status ailments that rain provides. The hydration ability transforms Vaporeon from merely bulky into nearly immortal during rain, creating weather-dependent power spike that makes Vaporeon substantially stronger on rain teams than on teams lacking rain support, demonstrating how abilities interact with weather, creating specialized niches that reward team building around synergies. Fact 47. The shiny coloration of Vaporeon is purple rather than blue, creating striking alternative palette that collectors prize for distinctive appearance that differs dramatically from normal coloration. Unlike some shinies, whose subtle changes are barely noticeable, the purple shiny Vaporeon became iconic representation of shiny evolutions whose varied alternative colorations all feature distinctive palettes that make shiny hunting for Eevee family rewarding through guaranteeing that whichever evolution is chosen will have visually impressive shiny form rather than disappointing subtle change that some other Pokémon families feature. Fact 48. Jolteon is the lightning Pokémon, evolving from Eevee through Thunderstone exposure, creating electric type that embodies speed and special attack through stat distribution, favoring 130 base speed and 110 base special attack. The evolution transforms Eevee's fluffy fur into spiky yellow coat that resembles lightning bolts, creating visual representation of electrical nature while also serving as sensory organs that detect electromagnetic fields, allowing Jolteon to sense electrical activity in environment, including thunderstorms and electrical equipment whose fields Jolteon's specialized fur can detect from distances that other Pokémon wouldn't notice electricity. Fact 49. Jolteon's fur is described as electrically charged needles that stand on end when Jolteon prepares to attack, creating visual warning that observant opponents might recognize before electrical discharge occurs. The needle-like fur serves defensive function, making physical contact dangerous for attackers who touch electrically charged hair, receiving shocks that damage, while also serving offensive function as projectiles that Jolteon can launch through contracting muscles that fire charged needles like organic taser, creating ranged electrical attacks that fur's structure enables beyond just conducting electricity through body contact. Fact 50. The ability to generate 10,000-volt electrical charges according to Pokédex entries makes Jolteon dangerous opponent whose attacks can incapacitate or kill through electrical damage that voltage exceeding safe limits, delivers to nervous systems that electrical current disrupts. The high voltage demonstrates how evolution granted Eevee biological electricity generation far exceeding what normal organisms can produce through specialized organs that convert chemical energy into electrical energy with efficiency that normal biochemistry doesn't achieve, making Jolteon living battery, whose electrical output rivals power plant generation despite being contained in dog-sized body that shouldn't physically contain generators producing such voltages. Fact 51. Jolteon's base, 130. Speed makes it fastest evolution and makes it among fastest Pokémon overall, creating speed tier that allows outspeeding most opponents and striking first in battles where speed advantage often determines outcomes. The exceptional speed combined with respectable special attack makes Jolteon into glass cannon that deals damage quickly before opponents retaliate, creating hit-and-run strategy where Jolteon's fragility doesn't matter. When battles end before enemies attack because Jolteon eliminated them first through speed advantage that evolution granted, through optimizing nervous system for rapid reactions and optimizing musculature for explosive movement. Fact 52. The lungs of Jolteon are described as particularly large, allowing deep breathing that provides oxygen for sustaining high-speed movement that metabolism demands when running at velocities that casual jogging doesn't approach. The enlarged lungs demonstrate how evolution coordinated multiple biological systems for supporting speed, lifestyle, where cardiovascular improvements were necessary for delivering oxygen that muscles need for sustained exertion, that even sprinting demands, creating holistic adaptation where changing one characteristic required, changing supporting systems that original characteristic depends on for functioning properly. Fact 53. Jolteon's hidden ability Quick Feet increases speed when afflicted by status condition, creating counterintuitive situation where being paralyzed makes Jolteon faster through ability that compensates for paralysis's speed reduction while providing additional boost, making status Jolteon faster than healthy Jolteon when Quick Feet activates. The ability transforms status conditions from disabilities into advantages, creating reverse psychology where opponents inflicting status accidentally strengthen Jolteon, whose ability exploits what should be weaknesses, turning them into strengths through biological adaptation that evolution provided for thriving despite impediments. Fact 54. The spiky appearance of Jolteon's fur made it visually distinctive among original trio, whose designs featured Vaporeon's smooth fins and Flareon's fluffy mane, creating variety within evolution designs that established pattern where each evolution would have unique silhouette distinguishable at glance. The spiky design influenced later electric-type designs that associated electricity with pointed shapes, creating visual language where spikes communicate electrical nature before type is explicitly stated, making design communicate information that experienced players recognize immediately without needing to read Pokédex entries or type labels. Fact 55. Flareon is the flame Pokémon, evolving from Eevee through Firestone exposure, creating fire type whose fluffy appearance conceals high body temperature that internal flame maintains at 1,650 degrees Fahrenheit, according to Pokédex entries describing biological furnace that Flareon contains for generating flames that combat requires. The evolution transforms Eevee into a creature whose metabolism operates at temperatures that would incinerate normal organisms, suggesting that fire types possess biochemistry fundamentally different from normal biology, where proteins denature and cells die at temperatures far below what Flareon maintains internally without apparent harm. Fact 56. Flareon possesses highest attack stat among evolutions with 130 base attack, creating physical powerhouse that could theoretically excel at physical combat. But Flareon's move pool notoriously lacked physical fire-type stab until Flame Charge and Flare Blitz were introduced, creating disconnect between stats and move pool that made Flareon competitively weak despite impressive attack, suggesting poor move pool design that didn't consider how Flareon would actually use attack that evolution provided without giving moves that attack would make effective. Fact 57. The flame sac that Flareon possesses stores fire at extreme temperatures, allowing Flareon to breathe flames on command without needing to ignite chemical reactions. Each time, attacks require fire. The biological storage organ raises questions about how living tissue contains inferno without burning from inside, but Pokémon biology allows impossibilities that normal physics forbids, making flame sac into accepted impossibility that games don't explain beyond acknowledging that Flareon somehow stores fire internally, despite this violating thermodynamics through containing energy that entropy should disperse unless Flareon possesses molecular structures that normal matter doesn't have. Fact 58. Flareon's fur serves as cooling mechanism according to some interpretations, where fluffy coat radiates heat away from body, preventing overheating that maintaining internal furnace would cause if heat couldn't escape. The counterintuitive function, where fur that should insulate instead dissipates heat, demonstrates how evolution repurposed Eevee's fur for different function when becoming fire type, required solving heat management problems that terrestrial mammal didn't face before evolution, transformed it into creature whose metabolism generates temperatures that would cook normal organisms from inside without cooling systems that specialized fur provides through radiating thermal energy that dangerous accumulation would create. Fact 59. The competition among original trio created hierarchy, where Vaporeon's bulk and Jolteon's speed made them competitively viable, while Flareon's poor move pool made it least useful evolution, creating unfortunate situation, where statistically strong Pokémon became weakest through inadequate move distribution that didn't complement stats. The hierarchy persisted across generations, with Flareon receiving only modest improvements, while Vaporeon and Jolteon remained solid choices, demonstrating how initial design decisions about move pool distribution create lasting consequences that subsequent generations' move pool expansions only partially addressed, without fully solving problems that original limited distribution created. Fact 60. Flareon's fluffy appearance made it popular among fans who valued aesthetics over competitive viability, creating disconnect between competitive weakness and fan popularity, where Flareon remained beloved despite being statistically weakest evolution. The popularity despite weakness demonstrates that players value characteristics beyond just competitive strength, with cuteness and visual appeal sometimes mattering more than battle effectiveness, making Flareon into example of how design success doesn't require competitive success. When aesthetic appeal creates fan base that wouldn't exist if only competitive viability determined popularity, that Flareon maintains despite or because of tragic history as least viable Evolution. Fact 61. Espeon is the sun Pokémon, evolving from Eevee through high friendship during daytime hours, creating psychic type that Generation 2 introduced alongside friendship evolution mechanic that rewarded bonding with Pokémon through affection that previous games hadn't measured explicitly. The friendship evolution represented philosophical shift where relationships mattered mechanically, creating systems where treating Pokémon well through battling with them, avoiding fainting, using vitamins, and avoiding bitter medicine created measurable affection that special evolutions required, demonstrating that bonds had tangible effects beyond just being narrative elements without gameplay consequences. Fact 62. Espeon's forked tail contains organ that emits psychic power according to Pokédex entries describing how tail movement channels telekinetic forces that Espeon uses for combat and for predicting opponent movements through precognitive power abilities that psychic sensitivity provides. The tail organ demonstrates how evolution specialized Eevee's anatomy for psychic capabilities through developing biological structures that channel mental energy into physical effects, creating mind over matter abilities that normal biology doesn't permit but which Pokémon biology enables through organs whose functions normal anatomy doesn't include an inventory of biological capabilities. Fact 63. The ability to sense air currents through sensitive fur allows Espeon to predict weather and predict opponent movements before they occur, according to entries describing how environmental sensitivity combines with psychic precognition, creating dual prediction system where physical sensors and mental projections both contribute to foreknowledge that battle advantage provides. The prediction ability makes Espeon extremely difficult to surprise, because knowing what opponents will do before they do it allows countermeasures that reactive strategies couldn't employ without advance warning. That prediction provides through showing futures that might occur if current trajectories continue uninterrupted. Fact 64. Espeon possesses 130 base special attack, tied with several other evolutions, and 110 base speed, making it fast special attacker whose psychic typing provides excellent neutral coverage that fighting and poison weaknesses somewhat undermine. The stat distribution makes Espeon into offensive threat that plays similarly to Jolteon through emphasizing speed and special attacks over durability, creating glass cannon whose frailty doesn't matter when speed allows striking first, eliminating opponents before they retaliate against squishy psychic type whose defenses won't survive hits from strong attackers, whose moves Espeon's typing doesn't resist. Fact 65. The bond between Espeon and trainer supposedly grants Espeon loyalty so strong that it will protect trainer even at cost of its own life, according to entries romanticizing friendship evolution through describing devotion that evolution process created or revealed. The loyalty narrative makes friendship evolution into not just mechanical requirement, but into story about relationships, where evolution represents commitment that Espeon makes to trainer, whose care earned devotion that evolution manifests through becoming form that serves and protects trainer, who provided affection that friendship evolution measured through invisible affection points that games tracked without displaying explicitly. Fact 66. Espeon's hidden ability Magic Bounce reflects status, moves, and hazards back at opponents, creating defensive utility that turns opponent strategies against them when entry hazards and status that would normally cripple Espeon instead affect opponents who attempted them. The ability makes Espeon excellent anti-support Pokémon that punishes hazard setting and status spreading, creating role where Espeon prevents opponents from establishing field control that entry hazards would provide through bouncing stealth rock, spikes, and toxic spikes back at users who didn't anticipate that their setup moves would backfire through hitting themselves instead of hitting intended target. Fact 67. The gem on Espeon's forehead supposedly concentrates psychic energy, creating focal point where mental powers converge before being projected outward toward targets that telekinesis affects. The gem serves as visual marker, identifying Espeon as psychic type, while also serving narrative function as power source or power conduit that Pokédex describes without explaining what gem is made of or how it grows during evolution. When Eevee didn't possess gem that suddenly manifests when transformation occurs, creating anatomical addition that evolution generates from nothing or from tissue that restructures into crystalline formation during metamorphosis. Fact 68. The sensitivity to trainer emotions that Espeon supposedly possesses creates empathic connection, where Espeon senses trainer's feelings through psychic perception that detects emotional states that normal observation might miss. The empathy makes Espeon into emotional support, companion whose presence comforts through understanding that transcends verbal communication, creating bond where words become unnecessary when telepathic or empathic connection allows direct emotional exchange that humans and Pokémon usually cannot achieve without psychic mediation, that Espeon's nature provides for trainers whose Espeon evolved through friendship, that empathic connection deepened or revealed. Fact 69. Umbreon is the moonlight Pokémon, evolving from Eevee through high friendship during nighttime hours, creating dark-type counterpart to Espeon, whose day-night requirement established temporal mechanics that later games would expand through introducing location-based evolutions. That time-of-day mechanics prepared players for accepting. The nocturnal evolution requires patience, waiting for night, or requires manipulating system clock, creating intentional obstacle that makes Umbreon slightly more difficult to obtain than Espeon, whose daytime evolution doesn't require waiting unless player trains during night sessions that real schedules sometimes dictate. Fact 70. Umbreon's rings glow when exposed to moon's light, and when Umbreon feels fear or excitement, creating visual display that communicates emotional state to observers who recognize that glowing intensifies during arousal regardless of whether arousal is positive excitement or negative fear. The bioluminescent rings serve communication function similar to how some deep-sea creatures use light for signaling, while also serving defensive function through startling predators who don't expect sudden illumination from prey, that appeared completely dark until rings activated, creating surprise that provides escape opportunity that darkness wouldn't offer without bioluminescence revealing Umbreon's position. Fact 71. The ability to spray poisonous sweat from pores, according to Pokédex entries, gives Umbreon defensive capability beyond just dark type, moves through biological toxin production that physical contact triggers, releasing poison that attackers absorb through skin contact. The poison production demonstrates how dark-type nature manifests biologically through dangerous secretions rather than just through attack types, creating organism whose body is weapon even without using formal moves, making physical body contact with Umbreon dangerous proposition that cautious opponents avoid through using ranged attacks that don't require touching creature whose skin exudes toxins. Fact 72. Umbreon possesses highest special defense among all evolutions, with 130 base special defense, paired with 110 defense and 95 HP, creating exceptional bulk that makes Umbreon into wall that special attackers struggle to damage. The defensive stat distribution makes Umbreon into support Pokémon, whose role involves surviving attacks while providing utility through wish passing, through toxic stalling, or through other defensive strategies. That longevity enables when Umbreon's bulk allows surviving long enough to execute strategies that frailer Pokémon cannot implement before being KO'd by opponents whose attacks Umbreon tanks through exceptional defenses. Fact 73. The hidden ability Inner Focus prevents flinching, creating reliability that Umbreon uses for guaranteeing that selected moves execute without interruption from flinch-inducing attacks that would prevent actions. The ability matters less than Magic Bounce that Espeon gets, but provides niche utility against flinch-heavy strategies that Paralysis and moves like Fake Out enable, making Inner Focus insurance against disruption that opponents employing flinch strategies use for preventing actions that Umbreon needs to perform without interruption, that flinching would create through preventing move execution that turn would otherwise allow. Fact 74. Umbreon's evolution represents embracing darkness according to thematic interpretation, where nocturnal evolution and dark typing suggest that strong bonds can develop in darkness as well as in light, creating counterpoint to Espeon, whose light association implies that friendship is bright, whereas Umbreon suggests that friendship can exist in shadows, making them complementary opposites where both represent bonds, but where temporal and thematic associations differ, creating yin-yang relationship between evolutions that express same underlying friendship through different elements. Fact 75. The shiny coloration of Umbreon is blue rings instead of yellow, creating one of most popular shiny forms in franchise through striking color change that dramatically alters appearance, making shiny Umbreon highly sought after by collectors who prize aesthetic that blue coloration provides. The popularity of shiny Umbreon demonstrates how effective alternative palette can be when color change is dramatic enough to create substantially different appearance rather than being subtle variation that casual observers might not notice without direct comparison between shiny and normal forms. Fact 76. The stalking behavior that Umbreon supposedly employs when hunting prey, according to Pokédex, creates image of predatory Pokémon whose nocturnal nature suits ambush tactics that darkness facilitates through providing camouflage that daylight wouldn't offer. The predatory description contrasts with friendly companion image that friendship evolution suggests, creating tension between Umbreon's nature as hunter and its role as partner, whose evolution through friendship suggests gentleness. That hunting behavior contradicts unless Umbreon compartmentalizes between hunting mode for wild prey and companion mode for trainer relationships. Fact 77. The type advantage that Dark-type Umbreon has over Psychic-type Espeon creates competitive relationship between friendship evolutions, where one counters the other despite both evolving through identical method whose only difference is timing. The type advantage suggests that darkness counters light or that night counters day, creating elemental opposition between evolutions that are mechanically siblings through sharing friendship requirement but which are combatively opposed through type matchups that give Umbreon advantage when fighting Espeon, creating asymmetric relationship where one friendship evolution dominates the other in direct confrontation. Fact 78. the patience required for achieving high friendship to evolve. Umbreon or Espeon creates time investment that other evolutions don't require, making friendship evolutions into rewards for dedication that quick stone evolutions don't demand. The investment creates attachment where players who spent hours building friendship feel more connected to Umbreon or Espeon than to Vaporeon, that waterstone instantly created without requiring relationship building that makes friendship evolutions feel earned rather than purchased, making them special beyond just mechanical differences through representing relationships that effort cultivated over time. Fact 79. Umbreon's role as special wall makes it competitively valuable in ways that other evolutions aren't, through providing defensive utility and that offensive team members cannot replicate, making Umbreon into glue that holds teams together through surviving attacks and through providing wish support that heals teammates. The utility role demonstrates that combat value doesn't require offensive stats when supporting teammates through healing and through sponging attacks, creates value that pure damage dealers cannot provide without sacrificing offensive power for defensive investment that specialists like Umbreon make for filling roles that balanced Pokémon cannot fill effectively. Fact 80. The emotional narrative surrounding Espeon and Umbreon as friendship evolutions makes them symbolically significant as evolutions representing bonds rather than representing environmental adaptation that original trio represented through stone evolution that required items but didn't require relationships. The symbolic shift from environmental factors to relational factors demonstrates how evolution methods expanded to include social dimensions, making evolution not just about habitat, but about bonds, creating richer narrative possibilities, where trainer relationships matter mechanically through enabling evolutions that stones alone couldn't trigger without affection. That invisible friendship points measured. And so concludes the second part of our Eevee exploration, having discovered Vaporeon's aquatic mastery and cellular water composition, Jolteon's electrical speed and needle fur projectiles, Flareon's physical power tragically unsupported by move pool, Espeon's psychic precognition and friendship-based loyalty, and Umbreon's defensive bulk and nocturnal poisonous nature that darkness evolution created. Rest now, if sleep calls, or continue to part 3 where we'll explore the remaining evolutions, Leafeon, Glaceon, and Sylveon, whose later introductions brought new evolution methods and new type coverage to family, whose expansion continues delighting fans across generations. Sleep gently, dear friends. Welcome back, dear friends, to our continuing exploration of Eevee and its evolutions. In this third part, we'll discover Leafeon and Glaceon, the Generation 4 evolutions that introduced location-based transformation mechanics. Explore Sylveon, the fairy-type evolution that Generation 6 added, showcasing the new type through Eevee's adaptability. Examine the competitive histories and strategies that each evolution developed across generations of metagame evolution. Investigate the type coverage gaps that remaining types represent as potential future evolutions, and uncover the cultural impact that Eevee family has had on Pokémon franchise through merchandise, fan art, and enduring popularity. So settle back comfortably, close your eyes when sleep beckons, and let us continue this gentle journey through the final transformations and the legacy that Eevee created. Fact 81. Leafeon is the verdant Pokémon, evolving from Eevee through leveling near Moss Rock in Generation 4, or using Leaf Stone starting in Generation 8, creating grass-type evolution that photosynthesis enables for sustaining life through converting sunlight into energy that chlorophyll-filled cells produce. The evolution transforms mammalian Eevee into plant-animal hybrid whose body contains botanical elements, including leaf-like tail and leaf-like ears that serve photosynthetic functions, making Leafeon partially autotrophic through generating some nutrition internally rather than depending entirely on consuming food that herbivores and carnivores require for obtaining all energy. Fact 82. The cells in Leafeon's body engage in photosynthesis, according to Pokédex entries describing how sunbathing isn't leisure, but is feeding where solar energy converts into chemical energy that metabolism uses for powering biological functions. The photosynthetic capability makes Leafeon less dependent on traditional food sources than other evolutions, whose purely animal metabolism requires consuming organic matter for obtaining energy that Leafeon can generate from sunlight and carbon dioxide that air provides, making Leafeon's nutritional requirements fundamentally different from carnivorous or omnivorous evolutions that cannot photosynthesize. Fact 83. Leafeon prefers clean water and clean air according to entries describing environmental sensitivity that pollution disrupts through interfering with photosynthesis that contaminated air and contaminated water prevent from operating efficiently. The environmental sensitivity makes Leafeon into indicator species whose health reflects habitat quality, with thriving Leafeon suggesting unpolluted environment, while sickly Leafeon suggests contamination that affects plant-based biology more severely than affecting pure animal biology, creating creature whose well-being serves as barometer for ecosystem health. That Leafeon's condition reveals to observers who recognize that environmental degradation harms photosynthetic organisms before harming other organisms. Fact 84. The sharp-tailed blade that Leafeon possesses serves as weapon despite being constructed from leaf-like material that appears fragile, but which evolution hardened into cutting edge, capable of slicing opponents. The leaf blade demonstrates how evolution adapted botanical structures for combat through reinforcing cellular walls with compounds that create rigidity, rivaling metal weapons, despite organic origins making plant tissue into viable weapon. That shouldn't work, according to normal botany, where leaves are soft and cannot maintain edges that cutting requires unless specialized evolution produced structural proteins that normal plants don't synthesize. Fact 85. Leafeon possesses highest defense among evolutions with 130 base defense, creating physical wall whose resistance to physical attacks exceeds other evolutions' defensive capabilities, making Leafeon into tank that physical innie. Attackers struggle to damage despite grass typing, creating multiple common weaknesses. The high defense, combined with access to synthesis for healing, makes Leafeon sustainable physical wall that can recover damage through absorption of sunlight that synthesis represents as healing move appropriate for photosynthetic Pokémon, whose relationship with light includes medical applications where solar energy restores health that damage depleted. Fact 86. The hidden ability chlorophyll doubles speed during harsh sunlight, creating weather-dependent strategy where Leafeon transforms from slow tank into fast sweeper when sun shines, making weather control central to maximizing Leafeon's effectiveness. The ability demonstrates how grass types benefit from sun that boosts fire-type attacks, while also empowering grass types through chlorophyll, creating complex weather dynamics where sun helps and harms grass types simultaneously through strengthening fire moves that threaten them, while also doubling speed that allows outspeeding threats and eliminating them before they attack with super effective fire moves. Fact 87. The seasonal behavior that Leafeon supposedly exhibits includes molting tail in autumn and regrowing it in spring, according to some Pokédex interpretations, suggesting that Leafeon follows deciduous pattern where leaves fall seasonally, before regenerating, creating cyclical transformation that mirrors how actual trees shed foliage during cold months when photosynthesis becomes inefficient. The seasonal molting would create periods where Leafeon is vulnerable through lacking tail blade that combat and balance depend on making autumn dangerous. Time for Leafeon, whose natural cycle creates temporary weakness that predators might exploit before spring regrowth restores full capabilities. Fact 88. Leafeon's design incorporates features from various plants, including leaves for ears and tail, moss-like fur, and coloration, suggesting forest camouflage, creating appearance that blends botanical and animal characteristics more thoroughly than most grass types, whose designs usually favor either plant features or animal features without integrating them as completely as Leafeon achieves through making plant elements into functional anatomy rather than decorative additions, suggesting that Leafeon's plant characteristics serve biological purposes beyond aesthetic choices that pure appearance would explain. Fact 89. The territorial behavior that young Leafeon display creates competition for sunlit areas where photosynthesis operates most efficiently, according to entries describing conflicts over prime locations that maximize solar energy absorption. The territoriality demonstrates how photosynthetic lifestyle creates different resource competition than carnivores or herbivores experience when optimal habitat is defined by light availability rather than by prey, abundance, or vegetation density, making Leafeon's ecological niche unique among evolutions through requiring environmental conditions that support photosynthesis rather than conditions that support hunting or foraging. Fact 90. Glaceon is the fresh snow Pokémon, evolving from Eevee through leveling near Ice Rock in Generation 4 or using Ice Stone starting in Generation 8, creating Ice-type evolution whose body temperature drops to -75 degrees Fahrenheit, allowing Glaceon to freeze moisture in air, creating ice crystals that form around body as protective armor and as weapon projectiles. The extreme cold makes Glaceon dangerous to touch for organisms lacking cold resistance when physical contact causes frostbite that sub-freezing temperatures inflict on warm-blooded creatures whose normal body temperature creates thermal gradient that heat flows across from warm flesh to cold Glaceon, causing tissue damage through freezing. Fact 91. The ability to control body temperature allows Glaceon to create ice from atmospheric moisture through cooling air below freezing point, causing water vapor to crystallize into frost that Glaceon shapes into icicles that serve as projectiles or into armor that protects from attacks. The temperature control demonstrates mastery over thermodynamics that normal biology doesn't permit when organisms can lower local temperature through body heat manipulation that violates conservation of energy unless Glaceon somehow expels thermal energy into surroundings or into pocket dimension, creating cooling effect through removing heat rather than through generating cold, which thermodynamics says is impossible because cold is absence of heat rather than being substance that can be produced. Fact 92. Glaceon's fur is described as frozen into icicle-like needles that stand erect, making coat into defensive structure that injures attackers attempting physical contact. The frozen fur serves dual purposes, providing insulation that prevents Glaceon's extreme cold from radiating away, while also providing armor that attacks must penetrate before reaching vulnerable body underneath, creating layered defense, where opponents must overcome frozen exterior before inflicting damage on flesh. That ice fur protects from conventional attacks. That fur's hardness resists through being ice rather than being soft mammalian fur. Fact 93. Glaceon possesses 130 base special attack, tied with several evolutions, making it powerful special attacker whose ice-type stab moves threaten many common types, including dragon, flying, ground, and grass, creating excellent offensive coverage, despite ice typing being notoriously poor defensively with multiple common weaknesses. The offensive power combined with decent 95 special defense makes Glaceon into mixed bag that threatens opponents while being vulnerable to physical attacks and vulnerable to fire, fighting, rock, and steel moves that ice typing is weak against, creating glass cannon whose offense exceeds defense by substantial margin. Fact 94. The hidden ability Ice Body heals Glaceon during hail, creating weather synergy similar to chlorophyll on Leafeon, where weather conditions determine effectiveness, making Glaceon substantially stronger on hail teams than on teams lacking weather support. The ability transforms Glaceon into sustain tank during hail through healing 1/16 HP each turn, while hail damages opponents lacking ice typing, creating gradual advantage that accumulates across turns, where Glaceon heals while opponents suffer residual damage, tilting battles toward Glaceon through weather effects that benefit user while harming opponents. Fact 95. The lore describing Glaceon freezing its own fur into icicles for launching at opponents creates image of Pokémon that weaponizes its own body through converting fur into ammunition that regrows after being fired, making Glaceon into regenerating projectile launcher whose ammunition is renewable resource that body produces continuously. The biological ammunition production raises questions about how quickly fur regrows after being launched, because sustained combat would deplete ammunition faster than regeneration replenishes supply unless Glaceon possesses accelerated fur growth that replaces projectiles within timeframes that combat durations span, making regeneration rapid enough that ammunition never exhausts during reasonable battle lengths. Fact 96. Glaceon's behavior includes sleeping in frozen caves where sub-freezing temperatures are comfortable rather than dangerous, according to entries describing habitat preferences that extreme cold satisfies, making Glaceon into cryophile, whose thermal comfort zone exists where most organisms cannot survive without protection. The preference for extreme cold creates habitat restrictions, where Glaceon thrives only in Arctic or alpine environments that maintain low temperatures year-round, making Glaceon geographically limited to polar regions or high mountains where climate sustains cold that Glaceon requires for comfort. Fact 97. The competitive history of Glaceon includes struggles with ice typing's defensive liabilities despite respectable offensive stats, making Glaceon difficult to use effectively when multiple common weaknesses and lack of resistances create vulnerability that opponents exploit through using fire, fighting, rock, or steel attacks that Glaceon cannot resist. The ice type's well-documented problems affect all ice types, including Glaceon, whose individual stats cannot overcome type-level disadvantages that make Ice one of worst defensive types, creating perpetual balance, issues that Ice types struggle with across all generations. Fact 98. The aesthetic appeal of Glaceon's crystalline appearance makes it popular among fans who appreciate sleek design. That light blue coloration and geometric features create giving Glaceon sophisticated appearance compared to other evolutions, whose designs emphasize cuteness over elegance. The popularity demonstrates how varied aesthetic approaches within evolution family appeal to different preferences, with some fans preferring fluffy Flareon or sleek Vaporeon, while others prefer Glaceon's refined appearance, creating diversity that ensures some evolution appeals to any player's aesthetic preferences. Fact 99. Sylveon is the intertwining Pokémon, evolving from Eevee through high affection plus knowing fairy-type move, creating Generation VI evolution that showcased newly introduced fairy-type through Eevee's adaptability, demonstrating how even established Pokémon families could incorporate new types that generation added to type chart. The affection requirement differed from friendship, creating confusion because affection measured through Pokémon Ami and later through Pokémon Refresh tracked separately from friendship, making Sylveon's evolution requirements more complex than Espeon or Umbreon, whose friendship was straightforward statistic. Fact 100. The ribbons extending from Sylveon's body are described as feelers that emit aura capable of calming hostility in opponents, according to Pokédex entries suggesting that ribbons serve combat function through psychological manipulation that reduces aggression that opponents feel towards Sylveon, making them hesitant to attack creature whose aura affects emotional states. The calming effect creates non-violent defense, where opponents simply lose desire to fight rather than being physically prevented from attacking, making Sylveon into pacifist whose defense involves eliminating conflict rather than surviving conflict through durability. Fact 101. Sylveon wraps ribbons around trainer's arm when walking together, according to entries describing physical affection. That evolution through high affection makes thematically appropriate when Sylveon, whose existence depends on bonds, expresses bonds through physical contact that ribbons enable. The ribbon wrapping creates image of deeply bonded Pokémon whose attachment to trainer manifests physically through maintaining contact that separation would break, making Sylveon into clingy companion whose affectionate nature that evolution required continues after evolution occurred, making transformation permanent expression of relationship that triggered it. Fact 102. The fairy-type classification gives Sylveon advantages against dragon, dark, and fighting types, while creating vulnerabilities to poison and steel attacks, establishing type matchups that made fairy-type into dragon counter that Generation VI introduced for balancing dragon types, whose dominance in Generation V created power creep that fairy-type addressed through providing immunity to dragon attacks, while dealing super effective damage to dragons that previously lacked common weaknesses besides other dragons and ice types. Fact 103. Sylveon possesses 130 base special attack and impressive 110 special defense, making it into balanced special attacker and special tank, whose stat distribution doesn't favor offense or defense exclusively, unlike most evolutions that specialize in particular role. The balanced stats make Sylveon versatile through being able to run offensive sets or defensive sets, depending on team needs and depending on which role requires filling, making Sylveon into flexible team member whose builds vary more than other evolutions whose stat distributions dictate obvious roles. Fact 104. The hidden ability Pixelate converts normal-type moves into fairy-type moves while boosting their power by 20%, creating ability that transforms Sylveon's move pool through making Hyper Voice into powerful fairy-type stab attack that becomes Sylveon's signature move when Pixelate boosts already strong 90 base power to 108 base power plus stab, creating effectively 162 base power attack that threatens opponents through sheer force that Pixelate enables. The ability makes Sylveon into offensive threat whose power exceeds what stats alone suggest, because Pixelate transforms normal moves into boosted fairy moves, creating pseudo-stab on moves that would normally be resisted, creating coverage that normal typing wouldn't provide. Fact 105. The bows adorning Sylveon's design create distinctly feminine appearance that makes Sylveon popular among players who appreciate cute aesthetic that ribbons and bows emphasize, creating most overtly adorable evolution whose design maximizes cuteness through incorporating fashion elements that other evolutions avoid. The gendered aesthetic creates somewhat controversial design because Sylveon can be male despite appearance suggesting femininity, creating disconnect between design language and actual gender distribution that remains standard. 87.5% male ratio that all Eevee share, making male Sylveon common despite ribbons and bows suggesting female gender that design implies without enforcing. Fact 106. Sylveon's introduction as only new evolution in Generation 6 created situation where single evolution was added, unlike Generation 2 and Eevee that added pairs, creating asymmetry that fans noted when expecting potential second evolution that would balance Sylveon the way Umbreon balanced Espeon or Glaceon balanced Leafeon. The solo edition suggested that future generations might add individual evolutions rather than adding them in pairs, establishing pattern where new evolutions aren't guaranteed in each generation but might appear sporadically when Game Freak decides to expand family. Fact 107. The competitive viability of Sylveon stems largely from Pixelate Hyper Voice, creating spammable spread move in doubles format, where hitting both opponents simultaneously creates value that singles battles don't provide, making Sylveon substantially stronger in doubles than in singles. The format-dependent strength demonstrates how same Pokémon can have dramatically different viability depending on battle format, with abilities and moves that seem modest in singles becoming powerful in doubles through affecting multiple targets or through synergizing with teammates in ways that solo battling doesn't permit. Fact 108. The calming ribbons that supposedly drain fighting spirit from opponents create lore suggesting that Sylveon doesn't just emit peaceful aura, but actively drains aggression, making opponents passive rather than making them peaceful. Through positive emotions, creating distinction, where pacification involves removing hostility rather than promoting friendliness, making Sylveon's effect potentially more sinister than benevolent appearance suggests when cute exterior conceals manipulation that removes autonomy through altering emotional states without consent that victims cannot refuse. Fact 109. The shiny coloration of Sylveon features blue ribbons instead of pink, creating alternative palette that some players prefer over normal coloration, while others prefer normal pink, creating divided opinions about which coloration is superior. The color debate demonstrates how subjective aesthetic preferences are when both colorations have devotees whose preferences don't derive from objective superiority but from personal taste that varies between individuals who find different colors appealing based on associations or on pure visual preference that rational analysis doesn't determine. Fact 110. The connection between Sylveon and affection rather than friendship creates thematic distinction, where Sylveon represents different kind of bond than Espeon and Umbreon, whose friendship evolution suggests companionship, while Sylveon's affection evolution suggests intimacy or devotion that friendship alone doesn't capture. The thematic difference makes Sylveon into evolution representing deeper or different connection than friendship evolutions represent creating hierarchy or spectrum of bonds, where affection exceeds friendship or exists alongside friendship as separate relationship dimension that different evolution method recognizes mechanically. Fact 111. The type coverage that Eevee family now possesses includes normal, water, electric, fire, psychic, dark, grass, ice, and fairy representing 9 of 18 types, leaving 9 types without evolutions, creating speculation about whether future generations will introduce remaining types or whether Eevee family is complete with current roster. The missing types include fighting, poison, ground, flying, bug, rock, ghost, dragon, and steel, creating potential for 9 more evolutions if Game Freak decides to complete type coverage, though some types seem thematically difficult to reconcile with Eevee's mammalian base form. Fact 112. The speculation about future evolutions includes fan designs and fan names for hypothetical evolutions, representing missing types with community, creating artwork and move lists, and evolution methods for evolutions that don't exist, creating grassroots world building that Game Freak sometimes incorporates when fan ideas align with developer intentions. The fan speculation demonstrates community investment in Eevee family, whose expansion fans eagerly anticipate despite having no confirmation that new evolutions will ever be added, making wishful thinking drive creative output that communities produce while waiting for official announcements. Fact 113. The pattern recognition that fans attempt about when evolutions are introduced seeks to identify predictable schedule that would indicate when next evolution might appear, but pattern has been inconsistent with 3 in generation, 2 in generation 2, 0 in generation 3, 2 in generation 4, 0 in generation 5, 1 in generation 5, 1 in generation 5, and 0 in generations 7 and 8. Creating irregular distribution that suggests evolution additions are opportunistic rather than planned, making predictions impossible because no reliable pattern exists for extrapolating future additions from past additions. Fact 114. The competitive tier placements of evolutions vary substantially, with some evolutions like Sylveon seeing usage in higher tiers, while others like Flareon languish in lower tiers, creating hierarchy within family, where some members are competitively viable while others are relegated to casual play or to niche strategies that serious competitive play doesn't accommodate. The tier variation demonstrates that sharing base stat total doesn't guarantee equal viability when move pool typing and ability differences create enormous disparity between strongest and weakest evolutions that 525 base stat total doesn't equalize. Fact 115. The Evolution Team Building Challenge involves using team of 6 containing only evolutions, creating restriction that forces using diverse evolutions rather than building optimal team from any Pokémonday. The challenge demonstrates type coverage that Eevee family provides when 6 members can create reasonably balanced team despite lacking some types, and despite overlapping weaknesses that multiple evolutions share through all being weak, too. Certain types that comprehensive team would address through, including dedicated counters that evolution restriction prevents using. Fact 116. The narrative potential of Eevee's multiple evolutions makes it popular choice for fan fiction and fan comics, where characters' evolution choices reflect personality or character development, creating stories where which evolution someone chooses reveals who they are or who they want to become. The narrative used demonstrates how mechanics become metaphors when evolutionary branching represents life choices where different paths lead to different outcomes that cannot be simultaneously experienced, making Eevee into protagonist whose fate readers influence through preferring particular evolution over alternatives. Fact 117. The merchandise featuring all evolutions together creates marketable set where collecting complete family becomes goal that completionist impulses drive, making Eevee family into product line unto itself, where plushies, figures, and other merchandise featuring all 9 forms create complete collections that fans pursue. The merchandising success demonstrates commercial viability that extends beyond individual popularity when family as unit creates value exceeding sum of parts through being collection that consumers want to complete, rather than being individual items that consumers purchase separately without feeling obligation to obtain all variants. Fact 118. The difficulty of obtaining all evolutions in single game without trading creates practical obstacle that multiple Eevee specimens are required for obtaining all evolutions when evolution is permanent, making each Eevee capable of becoming only one evolution, requiring 8 Eevee for obtaining all 8 evolutions plus 1 Eevee remaining as base form. The requirement creates gameplay loop where breeding Eevee becomes necessary for collection completion, making breeding mechanics important for trainers seeking complete evolution set without trading, which some players avoid due to lacking trading partners or preferring solo completion. Fact 119. The strategic consideration of which evolution to use depends on team composition and type coverage needs, making evolution choice contextual rather than absolute when different situations favor different evolutions. The context dependency demonstrates that no single evolution is universally best, but instead each excels in particular contexts where their typing and stats align with team needs, creating decision framework where trainers analyze team composition, determining which evolution complements existing members, rather than choosing evolution based on individual strength without considering team synergy. Fact 120. The legacy of Eevee and evolutions extends beyond individual generations into franchise-level icon status, where Eevee family represents Pokemon's core themes about diversity, choice, and adaptation, making them philosophically central to franchise, whose tagline about catching them all implies accepting diversity that Eevee embodies through being single species, containing multitude of possibilities, reflecting how broader Pokémon world contains multitude of species whose diversity parallels Eevee's internal diversity that evolution reveals through actualizing potential that base form contains. And so concludes the third part of our Eevee exploration. Having discovered Leafeon's photosynthetic botany and physical defense, Glaceon's cryogenic mastery and offensive ice power, Sylveon's fairy-type introduction, and ribbon-based pacification, the competitive histories where certain evolutions dominated while others struggled, the type coverage creating speculation about future evolutions, and the cultural legacy making Eevee family into merchandise phenomenon and narrative metaphor for choices shaping identity. Rest now if sleep calls, or continue to part 4 where we'll discover the final facts about training Eevee, evolution strategies, cultural impact, and ultimate significance of the evolution Pokémon Day. Sleep gently, dear friends. Good night, trainers. Welcome back, dear friends, to the final part of our comprehensive exploration of Eevee and its evolutions. In this concluding section, we'll discover optimal training strategies for preparing Eevee for evolution into specific forms, examine the breeding mechanics that dedicated trainers use for obtaining perfect Eevee specimens, explore the regional variants and special forms that certain games have featured, investigate the representation of Eevee in anime, manga, and other media beyond games, uncover the psychological and philosophical themes that Eevee's transformative nature represents, and conclude with reflections on why Eevee has remained beloved across nearly 3 decades, and what the evolution Pokémon teaches about adaptability, choice, and potential. So settle back one final time, close your eyes whenever sleep beckons, and let us complete this gentle journey through everything that makes Eevee special. Fact 121. The optimal nature for Eevee depends on which evolution is intended, with modest or timid natures favoring special attackers like Espeon, Jolteon, or Sylveon, while adamant or jolly natures favor physical attackers like Leafeon or theoretically Flareon, whose attack stat lacks physical fire, moves to capitalize on. The nature selection requires planning evolution before beginning training because nature's stat modifications persist through evolution, making early decisions about evolution path important for maximizing evolved forms' effectiveness through choosing nature that enhances stats that evolution will use, while minimizing stats that evolution won't prioritize. Fact 122. Eevee training for Eevee similarly requires anticipating evolution with defensive Eevee destined for Vaporeon or Umbreon receiving HP and defensive investment, while offensive Eevee destined for Jolteon or Espeon receiving speed and special attack investment. The Eevee allocation creates commitment to evolution path before evolution occurs, making trainers declare intentions through stat investment that would be wasted if different evolution is chosen, requiring retraining that effort values already spent cannot be reallocated without reset, that vitamins or berries must accomplish through reducing mistakenly allocated EVs. Fact 123. The breeding process for obtaining competitive EV involves inheriting ideal IVs through destiny not breeding, inheriting optimal nature through Everstone breeding, and potentially breeding for hidden ability through ability inheritance that female parent or male breeding with Ditto can pass to offspring. The breeding mechanics make obtaining perfect EV time-intensive process, requiring multiple generations of selective breeding, where offspring with desired characteristics become parents for next generation, gradually accumulating perfect stats through patient breeding that casual players might not undertake, but which competitive players consider essential for maximizing potential. Fact 124. The egg moves that Eevee can learn through breeding include Wish, Curse, Yawn, and others that some evolutions use more effectively than others, creating breeding consideration where obtaining egg moves might be necessary for certain competitive sets, but unnecessary for others. The egg move availability makes breeding valuable beyond just obtaining perfect stats, when unique moves that level up learning doesn't provide, require breeding with compatible species who know moves that Eevee cannot learn naturally but can inherit through breeding mechanics that transfer moves from parent to offspring. Fact 125. The decision point for when to evolve Eevee creates strategic consideration because delaying evolution allows learning moves that evolved forms learn later or don't learn at all, while evolving early grants evolved forms superior stats and stab moves that Eevee lacks. The evolution timing trade-off requires calculating whether moves that Eevee learns at lower levels are worth delaying evolution for, or whether evolved forms' advantages outweigh move pool benefits that waiting provides, making evolution timing into optimization problem where different solutions exist depending on whether early evolution or late evolution provides greater total benefit. Fact 126. The use of Eviolite item on Eevee creates alternative to evolution, where holding item boosts defensive stats by 50%, making unevolved Eevee surprisingly bulky and making evolution potentially unnecessary if maximizing defense is not cast. Goal. The Eviolite strategy demonstrates that sometimes refusing evolution creates viability that evolution would eliminate through committing to specialization, when maintaining flexibility has value that specialization sacrifices, making unevolved Eevee with Eviolite into legitimate competitive option rather than being strictly inferior to evolution that Tats suggests should always be superior. Fact 127. The partner Eevee in Let's Go Eevee cannot evolve, creating permanent base form whose compensation comes through having stronger base stats than normal Eevee, and through learning special moves representing multiple types. The evolution restriction makes partner Eevee into exception to species-defining characteristic, creating controversial decision where making signature Pokémon unable to evolve removes evolutionary potential that Eevee is known for, while providing alternative power fantasy where unevolved form becomes strong enough that evolution isn't necessary for competitiveness. Fact 128. The Gigantamax Eevee, available only to partner Eevee from Let's Go, creates exclusive transformation that regular Eevee cannot access, making partner Eevee special through having unique option that normal Eevee lack. The exclusivity creates value distinction, where partner Eevee's inability to evolve is compensated by having Gigantamax form that evolution would prevent accessing, creating trade-off, where evolution and Gigantamax are mutually exclusive paths that cannot both be chosen, making decision between them permanent, with consequences that cannot be reversed without restarting. Fact 129. The Z crystals for each evolution introduced in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon created type-specific Z moves for evolutions, including Hydro Vortex for Vaporeon, Gigavolt Havoc for Jolteon, and others, making each evolution capable of devastating attack that normal move pool doesn't provide. The Z-move access elevated evolution's power levels, temporarily creating generation where they could compete with stronger Pokémon through accessing ultimate moves that base power alone couldn't match, making Z-Crystal mechanics democratize power through giving all Pokémon access to strong attacks, regardless of natural move pool limitations. Fact 130. The Evolution tournament format in some competitive events restricts teams to using only Eevee and evolutions, creating specialized metagame where mirror matches and type advantages within family determine outcomes. The restricted format highlights family dynamics where certain evolutions counter others, creating rock, paper, scissors, relationships that broader metagame obscures through, including Pokémon outside family who might be stronger than all evolutions, making family-only format into protected environment where evolutions compete against each other without external threats that normal metagame includes. Fact 131. The appearance of Eevee in Pokémon anime features multiple prominent Eevee and evolutions owned by main and supporting characters across series spanning decades. The anime representation creates character development opportunities where evolution decisions reflect character growth, or where refusing evolution represents characters' choices about identity, making Eevee into narrative device whose transformation, or lack thereof, communicates character arc without requiring explicit dialogue, explaining what evolution means to character whose Eevee evolved or refused evolution. Fact 132. May's Eevee, that evolved into Glaceon in anime, demonstrated friendship evolution, alternative to game mechanics. When anime Eevee evolved through bonding rather than through location requirement, creating simplified narrative that emphasized relationship over geography. The anime adaptation of evolution mechanics prioritizes emotional storytelling over mechanical accuracy, making evolutions into plot points that happen at dramatically appropriate moments rather than happening through mechanical triggers that games use for evolution, creating divergence between game mechanics and anime storytelling that serves different purposes. Fact 133. Serena's Eevee, evolving into Sylveon in anime, showcased fairy-type evolution through affection that anime depicted through Eevee's attachment to Serena, creating visual and narrative demonstration of bond that mechanical affection points represent in games. The evolution scene created emotional moment that game evolution screens cannot replicate through being interactive rather than cinematic, making anime evolution into storytelling payoff that games mechanical evolution lacks because player controls timing rather than experiencing evolution as story beat that writers choreographed for maximum emotional impact. Fact 134. The Kimono Girls in Johto games use team of original 5 evolutions, creating memorable trainer battle where opponents use coordinated strategy, employing multiple evolutions whose types create coverage that complementary team composition provides. The Kimono Girls demonstrate how evolution team can be viable through proper construction, making them into role models for players attempting evolution-only challenges who need examples of how such teams function against opponents who use diverse Pokémon rather than restricting themselves to single evolutionary family. Fact 135. The Eevee user trainers in various games create recurring NPC archetype representing players who specialize in Eevee family, creating mirror matches where players' evolution faces opponents' different evolution, establishing type matchups that determine advantage. The specialist trainers validate Eevee family as viable theme team concept through showing NPCs successfully using family-restricted teams, demonstrating that self-imposed restriction doesn't prevent competence when proper strategy and proper training compensate for limitation that using only related Pokémon creates. Fact 136. The Adventures manga features multiple protagonists using Eevee and evolutions, with Red's Eevee famously switching between evolved forms through experimental device that game mechanics don't permit, creating unique interpretation, where single Eevee accesses multiple evolutions temporarily. The manga innovation demonstrates creative potential that adaptable nature suggests when taking evolutionary flexibility to logical extreme, where Eevee becomes all evolutions rather than becoming single evolution, creating power and fantasy that games don't support, but which Eevee's defining characteristic of adaptability narratively justifies. Fact 137. The philosophical interpretation of Eevee's evolution as metaphor for life choices, where selecting one path means foreclosing others, creates existential framework, where Eevee represents potential that actualization destroys through committing to particular identity. The metaphor resonates because everyone experiences similar foreclosure, where choosing career or relationship or location means not choosing alternatives that might have been equally valid, creating universal experience of path dependency, where early choices constrain later options, making impossible to explore all possibilities that youth contains before commitments, determine trajectory. Fact 138. The psychological concept of possible selves that individuals imagine becoming finds expression in evolutions, representing different possible futures that single present can branch into depending on circumstances and choices. The evolutions as possible selves creates framework, where Vaporeon represents aquatic future, Jolteon represents energetic future, Flareon represents passionate future, Espeon represents intellectual future, Umbreon represents mysterious future, Leafeon represents natural future, Glaceon represents elegant future, and Sylveon represents affectionate future, making each evolution into path that life might take, depending on what environmental and relational factors shape development. Fact 139. The anxiety that evolution choice creates for some players reflects decision paralysis, where having multiple good options makes choosing difficult because selecting one means not selecting others, creating fear of missing out that multiple branches exacerbate. The anxiety demonstrates psychological cost of choice when abundance of options makes decision harder rather than easier, creating paradox where limitation might facilitate decision through reducing options to manageable number, while abundance creates overwhelm that prevents commitment when too many possibilities exist for thoroughly evaluating all options before choosing. Fact 140. The trading economy around Eevee varies across games, with some generations making Eevee common through breeding accessibility, while other generations make Eevee rare through limited availability, creating fluctuating value that market forces determine. The economic variation demonstrates how scarcity affects value when identical Pokémon is highly tradable in generations where it's rare but has little trade value in generations where breeding makes it abundant, showing how context determines worth rather than intrinsic characteristics determining value independently of circumstances. Fact 141. The Eevee-themed merchandise includes plushies of all forms, figurines, clothing, accessories, home goods, and countless other products, making Eevee family into commercial empire unto itself, whose merchandising revenue likely exceeds most individual Pokemon's commercial performance. The merchandising success validates Eevee's design appeal through demonstrating that aesthetic preference translates into purchasing behavior when fans want to own representations of favorite Pokémon whose image appears on products. that consumers buy for displaying affection toward characters that emotional attachment creates through gameplay and through media exposure. Fact 142. The fan art community produces enormous volume of Eevee and evolution artwork, ranging from realistic interpretations to stylized adaptations to crossover art, placing Eevee in different fictional universes, creating vast gallery of user-generated content. The fan art demonstrates cultural penetration that Eevee achieved through inspiring creative output that professional content alone couldn't generate, making Eevee into collaborative creation where official design provides foundation that fan interpretations build upon through infinite variations that individual artists contribute to collective cultural project. Fact 143. The evolution fusions that fans create combine characteristics from multiple evolutions into hypothetical hybrids that don't exist in canon but which creative community imagines through artistic speculation. The fusion art demonstrates desire for even more diversity than 8 evolutions provide when fans imagine combinations like Vaporeon-Jolteon hybrid or Espeon-Umbreon fusion, creating designs that extend evolutionary family beyond official roster through community-generated additions. That unofficial status doesn't prevent from becoming culturally significant when popular fan designs achieve recognition, rivaling official Pokémon Day. Fact 144. The naming conventions that some fans use for evolutions include referring to them collectively as evolutions, but also using nicknames like Evolution Squad or identifying individual evolutions through abbreviated names like Vappy, Jolty, Flare, demonstrating affection through informal language. The nicknaming practice creates community vocabulary that shared interest generates when fans develop shorthand for discussing Pokémon whose full names become cumbersome through repetition, making abbreviated forms convenient, while also creating intimacy that casual language implies when formality gives way to familiar terms that community members use among themselves. Fact 145. The challenge runs, featuring Eevee, include solo Eevee runs where players complete games using only Eevee without evolving, creating artificial difficulty, or monocolor runs where players use only evolutions of specific color range like blue Vaporeon and Glaceon. The challenge variations demonstrate gameplay possibilities beyond intended experience when players create restrictions that increase difficulty, making games interesting beyond first playthrough through imposing limitations that force creative problem solving that unrestricted play doesn't require when optimal strategies become obvious without restrictions forcing alternatives. Fact 146. The personality theories that fans develop attribute character traits to evolutions based on their designs and types, creating fanon characterizations where Vaporeon is calm, Jolteon is energetic, Flareon is passionate, Espeon is intelligent, Umbreon is mysterious, Leafeon is peaceful, Glaceon is elegant, and Sylveon is affectionate. The personality associations create consistent characterization that fan works employ, making evolutions into characters with expected behaviors that community consensus establishes through repeated artistic and narrative use that solidifies interpretations into unofficial canon that fans recognize, even though games don't explicitly assign personalities beyond mechanical characteristics. Fact 147. The Eevee Community Day events in Pokémon Go created increased spawns and evolution opportunities, making evolutions accessible to mobile players who might not have obtained full set otherwise. The event format demonstrates how temporary abundance can democratize access to content that scarcity normally restricts, creating windows where casual players can obtain what dedicated players accumulated through sustained effort making. Special events into catch-up mechanics that reduce gap between hardcore and casual players through periodically making rare content common. Fact 148. The Eevee move called Extreme Evo Boost that sharply raises all stats creates ultimate expression of evolutionary potential through temporarily accessing power that permanent evolution would lock into specific stat. Distribution. The Z move represents having cake and eating it too, through enjoying benefits of evolution without committing to specific evolution, making it perfect capstone for Eevee, whose nature is containing possibilities without actualizing them, until external factors force commitment that Z move briefly achieves without permanence. Fact 149. The representation of Eevee in Pokémon card game includes numerous printings across sets with special promotional cards featuring artwork that showcases Eevee and evolutions together, creating collectible cards whose value derives from artwork quality and from scarcity that limited print runs create. The card game representation extends Eevee's commercial presence into trading card market, where different medium creates different collecting behaviors, making Eevee successful across multiple product categories whose independent markets all value Eevee through format-specific collecting that games, anime, merchandise, and cards each enable through creating unique products that collectors pursue. Fact 150. The Eevee evolution error that players discovered in early Pokémon Go created randomized evolution that players couldn't control, making evolution unpredictable before naming trick was discovered, allowing targeting specific evolution. The glitch created frustration, demonstrating how valuable choice is when removing agency, made evolution into lottery that random chance determined, rather than player preference, deciding outcomes that subsequent fixes allowed players to equal control, restoring agency that glitch had removed, creating appreciation for choice through experiencing what lacking choice felt like. Fact 151. The seasonal variations that fans imagine for evolutions include spring, Leafeon, summer Flareon, autumn Glaceon, and winter interpretations, creating calendar cycle that maps evolutions onto seasons. The seasonal association creates temporal dimension where different evolutions represent different times of year, making them into symbols of seasonal change that year contains through cycling through periods that different evolutions embody, making Eevee family into representation of time's passage that seasons mark through environmental transformations that evolutions parallel through their elemental associations. Fact 152. The Eevee house location in Generation 2, where player can obtain evolution triggering items and where NPC Eevee fan lives, creates dedicated space, acknowledging that Eevee devotion exists within game world, making meta commentary about how real fans' affection for Eevee mirrors NPC's affection, creating recursive acknowledgement, where game recognizes that Eevee inspires dedication that transcends normal appreciation, making some fans into specialists whose identity partially consists of Eevee enthusiasm that game validates through including NPC who shares players' passion. Fact 153. The asymmetrical gender ratios where 87.5% of Eevee are male creates breeding challenges for players seeking female Eevee for passing down species when breeding with non-ditto partners. The gender imbalance creates market dynamics where female Eevee are valuable trading commodities whose scarcity creates demand that supply cannot easily meet without dedicated breeding, producing female specimens whose rarity makes them premium trades that male Eevee cannot match despite being mechanically identical for most purposes except breeding inheritance that female gender enables for species propagation. Fact 154. The Eevee Heroes expansion in Pokémon card game featured evolutions prominently, with special VMAX cards and alternate art creating set where family was central focus rather than peripheral inclusion. The dedicated expansion demonstrated commercial viability of Eevee-focused product where entire set built around family could succeed commercially, validating that niche market for Eevee content exists whose demand supports specialized products that broader appeal doesn't require for commercial success, making Eevee into product category rather than being just element within larger product mix. Fact 155. The type coverage analysis reveals that team of 6 evolutions can achieve reasonable balance through including water for fire, divided by ground, divided by rock coverage, electric for water divided by flying coverage, psychic for fighting divided by poison coverage, dark for ghost divided by psychic coverage, grass for water divided by ground divided by rock coverage, and fairy for dragon divided by dark divided by fighting coverage, creating decent type synergy despite family restriction. The coverage analysis demonstrates that evolution team isn't just gimmick, but can be strategically sound through providing type diversity that counters common threats, making restriction less crippling than it might seem when family contains enough type variety that major weaknesses can be addressed through intelligent selection. Fact 156. The future speculation about potential evolutions includes community discussion about which types would be most interesting, with dragon type and ghost type being frequently requested additions that would provide interesting type combinations. The speculation demonstrates sustained interest in family expansion, where community actively desires new additions rather than being satisfied with current roster, making Eevee family into incomplete collection that additions would complete through filling gaps that missing types represent, creating perpetual anticipation that each new generation might finally introduce evolution, representing favorite type that current roster lacks. Fact 157. The Eevee starters in Let's Go games created situation where version mascot couldn't evolve, making design decision that prioritized keeping iconic Pokémon visible throughout game over, allowing evolution that would replace recognizable starter with different form. The decision demonstrates tension between mechanical identity as evolution Pokémon and commercial identity as marketable mascot, where evolution would undermine latter purpose, creating conflict that resolved in favor of commerce through maintaining Eevee form rather than allowing evolution that Eevee's nature suggests should be inevitable outcome of growth and experience. Fact 158. The Eevee blanket ban. Discussions in hypothetical competitive formats consider whether allowing all evolutions creates unfair advantage through type coverage that single player can achieve through preparing multiple specimens. The debate demonstrates that family versatility could be problematic in certain contexts, where choosing from 8 specialized forms provides flexibility that choosing from broader pool paradoxically doesn't provide through allowing single dedicated trainer to counter any threat through having prepared appropriate evolution, creating coverage that generalist approaches struggle matching without similar preparation. Fact 159. The legacy of Eevee extends beyond individual appeal into symbolic significance, representing Pokemon's core themes about diversity within unity and about potential becoming actuality through choices and circumstances that shape development. The symbolic resonance makes Eevee philosophically central to franchise, whose premise involves collecting diverse creatures, while Eevee demonstrates that diversity can exist within single species whose genetic flexibility contains multitude, making Eevee into microcosm of broader Pokémon world, whose diversity Eevee's evolutionary radiation represents through being single species, containing nearly as much variety as many entire families possess, through having multiple evolutionary stages and branches. Fact 160. Eevee ultimately represents possibility, the fundamental potential that exists before choice determines outcome, the undifferentiated capacity that specialization will channel into particular form, the blank slate that experience will write upon creating identity from potential that preceded it. In this way, Eevee is not just evolution Pokemon through mechanical classification, but is evolution itself through embodying transformative process, where what will be emerges from what is through development that internal potential and external circumstances collaboratively determine. The enduring appeal comes from recognizing ourselves in Eevee's journey from potential to actuality, from seeing our own life choices reflected in evolution decisions that cannot be reversed, from understanding that becoming who we are means not becoming who we might have been in alternative circumstances that different choices or different environments would have created. Eevee teaches that transformation is natural, that adaptation is survival, that specialization brings power alongside limitation, and that choosing one path means accepting that other paths will remain forever unexplored as possibility collapses into actuality through evolution that is simultaneously gain and loss, gaining power and identity while losing flexibility, and alternative futures that unevolved potential contained before choice determined which possibility would become reality. And so, we conclude our comprehensive journey through 160 facts about Eevee and its 8 evolutions, having explored genetic instability, enabling unprecedented evolutionary flexibility, balanced base stats reflecting undifferentiated potential, diverse evolution methods, representing environmental and relational triggers, the original trio of stone-based evolutions, introducing concept, friendship evolutions, adding temporal mechanics, location-based evolutions, incorporating geography, affection, evolution showcasing new type, competitive histories, revealing strengths and weaknesses, type coverage, creating speculation about future additions, training strategies for optimizing evolution, breeding mechanics for obtaining perfect specimens, representation in anime and manga, merchandise success demonstrating commercial viability, fan community producing creative content, philosophical interpretations about choice and identity, and ultimate significance as symbol of potential and transformation that resonates across generations of players who found themselves reflected in Eevee's evolutionary journey. Eevee's lasting impact on Pokémon franchise demonstrates how single species can embody core themes more effectively than elaborate storylines through being living metaphor for concepts that resonate universally, that we contain multitudes of possibilities before circumstances and choices determine which possibilities actualize, that adaptation is essential for survival in changing environments that favor flexibility over rigidity, that specialization brings excellence in narrow domains while sacrificing versatility that generalists maintain, that relationships shape development through providing contexts that influence which potentials manifest, and that identity emerges gradually through accumulation of experiences and commitments that foreclose alternatives while establishing coherent sense of self from undifferentiated potential that preceded it. The evolution Pokemon has remained beloved across nearly 30 years since generation. He introduced it because Eevee's design successfully combines aesthetic appeal with mechanical innovation, with philosophical depth, creating character that works on multiple levels simultaneously, as cute companion whose fluffy appearance inspires affection, as strategic tool whose type flexibility solves team-building challenges, and as symbol representing life's journey from potential to actuality through transformations that experience and environment collaboratively produce. This multi-layered success explains why Eevee transcended being mere game mechanic to become franchise icon, whose recognition rivals even Pikachu's among audiences who appreciate that Eevee represents something profound about existence itself, through being creature whose nature is becoming what circumstances allow and what choices determine. The family of 8 evolutions creates narrative possibilities that single linear evolution could never achieve through providing branches that represent different paths life might take, depending on factors beyond individual control and on every choices that individuals make when agency intersects with circumstance, creating outcomes that neither alone would determine. Each evolution represents valid path that life could follow, with none being objectively superior to others, making choice about which evolution to pursue into authentic decision, where preferences and circumstances both matter, creating complex determination that simple optimization cannot resolve, because different situations favor different specializations, making context essential for determining which evolution serves specific needs that particular moment presents. Sleep now, dear friends. Having completed this exhaustive exploration of Eevee, whose evolutionary potential exceeds all other Pokémon through possessing genetic plasticity, allowing it to become nearly anything that environment demands or that relationships encourage, may your dreams be filled with transformation, with choices that shape identity, with potential awaiting actualization, with paths branching into futures that current moment contains as possibilities, and with understanding that who we become depends on where we are, who we're with, and what we choose when opportunities present themselves, making life into evolutionary journey where we continuously adapt to circumstances while maintaining core essence that persists through transformations that experience produces. Thank you for joining this comprehensive journey through Eevee family, whose diversity within unity demonstrates that single species can contain multitudes when genetic instability becomes adaptive advantage rather than pathological liability, making Eevee into success story about flexibility in world that often demands specialization, showing that sometimes maintaining options has value exceeding any particular option that commitment would choose. Good night, dear trainers who appreciate that Eevee teaches profound lessons about adaptation, about choice, about potential, and about becoming through choosing which possibilities to actualize from many that potential contains before evolution determines which form will emerge from undifferentiated base that could become many things, but which becomes one thing through process that is simultaneously liberation and limitation. Liberation through achieving power and identity that specialization provides, limitation through foreclosing alternatives that evolution makes impossible to pursue once transformation commits to particular path that excludes others, making evolution permanent statement about what one has become through choosing or through being chosen by circumstances that determine outcomes. Rest peacefully knowing that transformation is natural, that adaptation is wisdom, that choosing one path doesn't make unchosen paths invalid, but simply makes them roads not taken in life that took different direction through decisions and through circumstances that collaboratively determined trajectory that might have been different if variables had arranged differently when possibilities collapsed into actualities through evolution, that is metaphor for all development, where we become who we are through combination of nature providing potential, nurture providing context, and choice providing direction when agency intersects with circumstance, producing outcomes that pure determinism or pure free will alone couldn't generate without collaboration between what is given and what is chosen. Sweet dreams of evolutionary potential awaiting circumstances that will determine which of many possible futures becomes actual future that experience creates through living forward from present into possibilities that current moment contains as seeds waiting for conditions that will germinate them into forms that potential implied but which actuality determines through specificity that generality cannot provide until choice and chance collaborate. Good night forever, dear Eevee enthusiasts. The journey is complete. Sleep among possibilities, dream of transformations, rest in knowledge that becoming is continuous process where we evolve throughout lives through experiences that shape us into forms that potential contained without predetermining which possibilities would actualize through living, that make some possibilities real, while leaving others forever hypothetical in alternative histories that might have been but weren't, because different paths were chosen in world where Eevee reminds us that having options is blessing and burden, blessing through enabling adaptation, burden through requiring choices that foreclose alternatives, making every evolution into permanent commitment to particular identity that excludes others. Good night. Sleep gently among 8 evolutions, plus 1 base form, 9 paths, representing infinite possibilities. Rest now.